Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, maybe the biggest mystery there is, the nature of you.
And we don't just mean your personality or what you do for a living.
No, not at all. We're talking about the deep down operating system, the thing that generates that constant subjective feeling of being I.
And that leads to a really profound paradox, doesn't it? If the goal is personal transformation, to be happier, more resilient,
Flourish.
to flourish, exactly. Why is it that the path to that flourishing, especially through things like advanced meditation, often leads to states where that core sense of self just seem to vanish?
It feels completely backward. To find yourself, you have to lose yourself. It really begs the question, what is this thing we call the self?
It does. And for this deep dive, we've pulled together some fascinating material. We're looking at contemporary contemplative science, some really deep neuroscientific theory.
And crucially, the phenomenology. The firsthand reports from people who've actually taken this journey to its most extreme ends.
Our mission for you, listening to this, is to start seeing the self in a new way, not as some fixed, permanent little entity inside your head.
Like a little CEO pulling the levers.
Right, not that. Instead, we want to explain the self as an adaptive, hierarchical construct that the brain engineers. And then, and this is the really exciting part, we'll show how specific, intentional practices can systematically dismantle that construction.
And that dismantling leads to insight, to emotional release, and ultimately to a kind of liberation.
To do that, we need a common language,
Yeah.
a framework that connects, say, ancient Buddhist psychology with modern cognitive science.
And that framework is called predictive processing, or PP. Sometimes you'll hear it called active inference.
It's absolutely foundational for this conversation. It gives us a kind of computational map of experience. It lets us ask these huge questions. How did the mind evolve? How does it build a self?
And how can we deconstruct it?
Exactly. How can we deconstruct that model without, losing our minds? It provides the science to explain why this profound inner freedom is possible, just through careful attention.
Okay, let's unpack that. Predictive processing. For anyone who's hearing this for the first time, if we had to boil the brain's main job down to just one thing, what would it be?
The brain is, at its core, a hierarchical prediction machine, or what scientists call a generative model.
So its job isn't just to see what's happening.
No, its most basic function isn't to passively take in data from the world. It's to constantly, relentlessly generate predictions about what the next bit of sensory input should be.
It's not just reacting to reality, it's trying to guess it
Yeah.
milliseconds ahead of time.
That's it exactly. It's constantly running a simulation of what happens next. Think of it less like a camera recording the world.
And more like a scientist locked in a dark room.
Perfect analogy. That scientist, your brain, can't see the world directly. It just gets these noisy, indirect signals through the senses. So its only job is to build the best possible internal model, the best hypothesis, to explain where those signals are coming from.
And what's the driving force behind that? What's its core motivation?
The fundamental drive is mathematical, really. It's to minimize prediction error.
Prediction error being the difference between the guess and what actually happens.
Precisely. The mismatch between what the brain predicted and what the senses actually delivered. Minimizing that error means reducing uncertainty, reducing entropy, all in the service of maintaining a stable existence, homeostasis.
The brain wants to be right. It likes being predictable.
It needs to be right. If the brain is consistently wrong about the world, the organism doesn't survive for very long.
Right.
But the crucial thing here is that this process isn't flat. It's not all happening on one level. It's hierarchical.
So we're moving up a ladder of abstraction. What do these different layers do?
Exactly. The lower levels of the hierarchy are all about concrete, immediate sensory data, the raw stuff, the pressure of your feet on the floor, the specific pattern of light hitting your retina. These are very fast, very specific predictions.
And the higher levels.
The higher levels encode much more abstract conceptual information. This is where you get complex things like planning, language, abstract thought, and most importantly for us, the self-narrative. The lower levels predict what you're sensing. The higher levels predict who you are and why you're sensing it.
The bottom is physics, the top is philosophy. That makes sense. And that brings us right to the core question. How does this prediction machine generate a self?
Well, if the brain is making inferences about everything, then the self must also be an inference, a high-level one.
And that's the key insight from active inference theory.
It is. The self isn't some permanent thing we're born with. It's a construction. an emergent property that the system has to create to function properly.
Okay, that sounds a bit circular. Why does the brain need to invent a me just to get through the day? Can you give us an example?
Sure, think about what it means to be an agent, to do something. To act effectively in the world, an organism has to represent itself as a kind of hidden cause of sensory changes.
A hidden cause.
Let's use a simple example. Picking up a glass of water. To predict the sensory outcome of that action, how the glass will feel, how your vision will change as your hand moves, your brain must have an internal model of your body.
Okay, a body map.
But more than that, it needs a model of your body as the intentional agent that is capable of picking up that glass. Without modeling a self that has intentions, the system can't tell the difference between sensory changes it causes
Like reaching for the glass.
and sensory changes caused by something else, like the glass being knocked over by the wind. The self model is what allows it to predict the consequences of its own actions.
So the self is a kind of necessary fiction, a sophisticated story the brain tells itself, so that the whole predictive loop can function and we can move through the world in a coherent way.
That word coherent is key. Active inference suggests that all our different streams of perception get integrated into one single unified experience. And at the center of that experience is the self, the unified agent.
So the brain takes all this separate data body states, sensory input, memories, and it just weaves it all together into a story.
A single cohesive narrative. And that process is what some theorists call phenomenal selfhood. It feels totally unified and real, even though it's a composite, a construction.
Okay, so that's the foundation. But what's the ingredient that turns that simple self-model into the complex, often overwhelming human personality we all experience?
Time. Time is the accelerator. Human self-awareness is built on models with incredible temporal depth.
Meaning we can think far into the past and far into the future.
Exactly. This is our, maybe uniquely human capacity to project. We can remember the distant past and we can imagine and plan for the distant future. This lets us create these incredibly complex, counterfactual trees.
Thinking about all the things that aren't real but could be, all the what-ifs.
And that capacity is the engine of higher intelligence. It's probably evolution's greatest trick for survival. Planning, avoiding future dangers.
But it's also a paradox, right? That same system seems to be the source of so much of our suffering.
It's a huge evolutionary paradox. This incredibly complex self-model is amazing for long-term survival, but a mind that gets too restricted by its own habitual models, especially models about its own identity, can become rigid, maladaptive.
And that's where the anxiety kicks in. This super smart system designed to keep us safe is now the main reason we're unhappy.
Precisely. Because the mind is so good at projecting into the future and running simulations, it's constantly worrying about what is not happening.
Right.
We run these endless thought experiments about futures we want to avoid. What if I lose my job? What if I get sick? What if people don't like me? The vast majority of our worries are high-level predictions about things that aren't actually happening right now.
It's the internal narrator that just never shuts up. And it's not just telling a story. It's constantly checking our status.
Our sources call it an incessant and often negative social computing engine.
A social computing engine.
Yeah, and it doesn't operate logically or slowly. It uses this rapid, unconscious pattern matching based on symbolic life story scripts we've learned since we were kids. And the self symbol is at the center of almost all of them. The whole machine is just trying to assess social risk.
So why is its output so negative so much of the time? If it's just a computer, why does it generate so much unhappiness?
Because its programming is based on ancestral survival pressures. In our evolutionary past, competition for resources, for status, was life or death. So the brain evolved a really strong negativity bias. It's just more adaptive to overestimate a threat than to underestimate it.
Better safe than sorry.
Much better. So the engine is constantly running these what-if scenarios. What if I look foolish? What if I'm rejected? These are all high-level predictions about our social safety.
So the feelings we have, the anxiety, the jealousy, the alienation, those are just the prediction errors. They're the alarm bells from the system worrying about some future social failure.
That's the high price we pay for having such a big, efficient brain. That constant stream of abstract prediction error about status, identity, the future. That is the fuel for so much of our suffering. We get locked into these rigid stories. I'm a successful person, I'm a failure. And when reality doesn't match the story, the error signal is felt as emotional pain.
So we have this constantly predicting, often maladaptive, self-generating brain. But it's not a fixed system. It can be updated. And that update often comes in what we call an insight or an aha moment. And what's amazing is that this predictive processing framework can actually explain the mechanics of insight.
This brings us to a concept called fact-free learning.
Fact-free learning.
Yeah, it's when the brain's generative model gets refined, but not because of new data from the outside world. It's a purely internal reorganization. We suddenly see a solution or a new connection without any new external information.
That perfectly explains the shower thought phenomenon.
Yeah.
You're not even trying to solve the problem. You're doing something mindless, and then bam, the answer just pops into your head.
Exactly. During that incubation period, the brain's internal models are sort of shifting around in the background without the noise of new data coming in. It's like the scientist in the dark room rearranging the existing evidence on his desk and suddenly seeing a whole new pattern.
And we know these insights are real model refinements because they stick. They actually change how we think and act afterwards.
They do. Which brings us to the feeling itself, that sudden flash of clarity and truth. The eureka heuristic, as our sources call it. Why does an insight feel so good, so true? Why the rush?
Right, there's a real pleasure to it.
Well, that feeling plays a key role. It helps us quickly select an idea when we're uncertain. It's a kind of metacognitive signal that says, hey, trust this one. And the mechanism has two parts, both explained by active inference.
Okay, so component one is the content, the new idea itself.
Correct. The actual content of the insight is a higher order prediction error. It happens when the brain figures out a way to simplify its model of the world, a process called Bayesian reduction. That sudden simplification is the elegant solution.
And the second component is the feeling, the pleasure, the confidence, the aha that grabs your attention. How does the brain generate that feeling?
That feeling is generated by something called dopaminergic precision weighting, and this is absolutely key.
Dopamine, the reward chemical.
It is, but here it's playing a very specific role. It's modulating the precision that gets assigned to that new prediction error. And precision, in the language of this framework, is basically the felt confidence or realness or truth value of an experience.
Wait, so dopamine is telling the brain this new idea isn't just clever, it's real.
That's a great way to put it. Think of precision as a volume knob for reliability. When the brain finds a really elegant, high-level solution that explains a ton of messy data, it cranks the precision way up. It's saying, this update is incredibly reliable and important.
And the dopamine is the physical mechanism that turns the knob.
And that release of dopamine gives you that intense rush of pleasure and confidence, the feeling of grasping an objective truth. It forces you to pay attention and reweight your entire model of the world around this new insight.
So the feeling itself is a signal. It's the brain's way of making sure you don't just ignore this critical model update.
Exactly. The feeling signals confidence and reliability. It's an internal validation stamp.
This sounds incredibly useful for survival.
Right.
You figure out a better way to hunt. You need that high precision
Aha!
to make sure you remember it. But if the feeling of truth is just a value the brain assigns,
Yeah.
it can be tricked, right?
And that is the dark side of Eureka. The risk of truthiness.
Truthiness. I like that.
Because that feeling of truth, that high precision, is assigned super rapidly based on all your prior learning and biases. It's built for speed, not for perfect accuracy. And so the brain can be fooled into assigning huge confidence to a really bad idea.
There's that famous story about the philosopher William James and nitrous oxide. He'd inhale, he'd have these world-shattering epiphanies.
And then he'd scribble them down, and when he was sober, they were complete gibberish. That's a perfect illustration of separating content from confidence. The drug was messing with his system, inducing a false epiphany state. It was a false inference of veridicality. His brain was just stamping profoundly true on everything.
So his precision weighting mechanism was broken.
It was. And we can see this scientifically. We know that dopamine antagonists can impair this kind of learning. And we see similar patterns in clinical conditions like psychosis, where the system assigns way too much precision to internal thoughts.
Like thinking the TV is sending you secret messages.
Exactly. The system loses its ability to downweight its own internal chatter, so everything feels incredibly significant and real.
Wow. So the same machinery that gives us genius can also lock us into delusion. It makes you question every strong belief you've ever had. How do you know if it's a real insight or just a dopamine surge?
And that is the fundamental challenge, isn't it? The solution has to involve deliberately untraining the brain's habit of assigning such high precision to its own abstract stories about the self. And that, of course, is where meditation and contemplative practice come in.
Okay, this is the perfect transition. If suffering is caused by these rigid, high-level prediction models that are too convinced of their own truth, then meditation must be a way of systematically loosening that grip.
That's exactly how it looks through the lens of predictive processing. Meditation is fundamentally about deconstructing. It's about unlearning habitual mental patterns.
You're helping the brain get out of its own way.
You're helping it disengage from its constant future gazing to just inhabit the present moment. In computational terms, we'd call it pruning the counterfactual tree. You're literally cutting back on all the what-if branches of thought.
Okay, so let's walk through the main styles of meditation. Our sources suggest they map onto the brain's hierarchy, right? A systematic way of moving from abstract thought down to raw sensation.
They map on almost perfectly. First, you have focused attention, or shamatha.
This is the classic, right? Focus on the breath.
Exactly. You pick one object, the breath is common, and you work on stabilizing your attention there. In PP terms, you are deliberately upweighting the precision of the sensory input from the breath.
So you're making the feeling of the breath incredibly real and important in the mind. And that must have a knock-on effect.
A huge one. The brain only has so much precision to go around. So when you crank up the precision on the breath, it causes a relative downweighting of everything else.
Meaning all those distracting thoughts and worries.
They get downweighted. This is the first step in what's called de-reification. You're reducing the subjective realness, the stickiness of your own thoughts.
Can you give me a practical example? What does that feel like in the moment?
Sure. You're sitting there, focusing on your breath, and a thought pops up, a worry about a meeting next week. Normally, that thought would have high precision. It would feel urgent and real.
Right, it would grab you.
But because you've intentionally made the physical sensation of breathing the most precise thing in your universe, that thought it doesn't land with the same force. It feels more like background noise. You see it, but you don't have to believe it's so important.
So you're sharpening one part of your experience to make the rest of it less convincing. Okay, what's the next stage? Open monitoring.
Open monitoring, or vipassana, insight meditation. This is the classic mindfulness practice. Here, instead of picking one object, you treat all arising signals, thoughts, emotions, sensations non-preferentially.
So instead of cranking up the precision on one thing, you're, what? Turning everything down.
In a sense, yes. By observing everything without judgment, you're essentially assigning an equally low precision to all of it. A thought about dinner has the same value as the feeling of an itch on your nose. You're training the brain not to get hooked, not to grasp.
You're starving the narrative engine of its fuel. If you don't assign importance or precision to your thoughts, they can't link together to form a big, heavy story about yourself.
That's the mechanism, exactly. You're learning not to overinvest in these transient mental events. And this is what shifts you from being stuck in the chattering narrative self to being more grounded in the here and now embodied self.
So we've gone from the story to the focus to this state of pure observation, like a witness. But there's a level beyond that, right? Non-dual practice, where even the witness disappears.
Right. Non-dual meditation, like Dzogchen or Shikantaza, just sitting. This is where the practice aims to deconstruct the final duality, the separation between the subject who was observing and the object being observed.
That seems impossible to even talk about. The moment you say the witness disappeared, you've just created a witness who noticed it.
It absolutely pushes the limits of language because our language is built on that subject-object split. But active inference gives us a potential way to understand it computationally.
How so?
Well, if all our experience, including the feeling of a self, is built by abstracting away from the present moment, then it follows that if the mind could stop doing that, if it could stop building models with that temporal thickness,
If it could exist purely in the now with no past or future.
then the high-level activity that relies on that temporal modeling, which includes self-awareness, would simply disappear. It would cease to be constructed.
So it's not about getting rid of the self, it's about creating the conditions where the brain stops building it in the first place.
Exactly. It's a profound stopping of the self-modeling process. And this whole continuum maps directly onto that hierarchical pruning of the self. We see this clear progression.
The narrative self gets quieted first, then the embodied or experiencing self becomes the focus, then the subtle witness fades, and finally there's the possibility of pure awareness, or even cessation.
And we even have neuroimaging that supports this idea of a layer-by-layer deconstruction.
Really? What does that look like?
Well, in one major study, they found that quieting the high-level narrative self corresponded with decreased activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, That's a huge hub in the default mode network.
Which is the network that's active when we're mind-wandering, thinking about ourselves, planning.
Exactly. Less activity there means less inner chatter. But for the deeper experiences, the ones that challenge the basic sense of agency.
The feeling that I am in control of my body.
For those experiences, they saw changes in a different area, the temporoparietal junction, or TPJ. That area is critical for our sense of spatial awareness and agency. So when a meditator reports their sense of self dissolving, the neuroscience shows changes in the very brain regions that build that sense of self.
It's not just a psychological feeling, it's a measurable physical change in brain organization. The model is being rewired in real time.
And this also helps explain why, for some people, these experiences can be really distressing at first. The system is getting a fundamental update to its most basic prediction, who you are, and that can feel very disorienting until the new, simpler model stabilizes.
We've now arrived at the really deep end of the pool, the pinnacle of this whole process. It starts with an insight called no-thingness, or emptiness in Sanskrit, jnata.
What is this, and why is it considered so liberating?
Phenomenologically, from the inside, emptiness is the direct realization that everything, the self, objects, thoughts, goals, lacks inherent substantial existence.
They aren't solid things out there in the world. No, they are mental fabrications. They are representations that the mind constructs through this incredibly complex, interdependent process of inference.
It's the ultimate penny drop moment. We don't see reality as it is. We only ever see our brain's best guess about reality based on all our past conditioning.
That's it. And from the predictive processing view, recognizing emptiness means systematically reducing the precision over all those high-level abstract layers of the hierarchy. The system learns deeply that its own stories are not objective truth. They're just provisional hypotheses.
Our sources use this very technical phrase, an intrinsically motivated low-belief precision hyperprior. Can you break that down?
A hyperprior is like a master setting. It's a belief about how trustworthy all your other beliefs are. So if you install a low belief precision hyperprior, you're basically programming your whole system to never be 100% certain about any of its abstract models.
It keeps everything provisional, flexible.
It's the computational basis of wisdom. Emptiness reveals that all our rigid viewpoints are just conditioning. And the functional benefit of that is enormous.
What's the payoff? Why does it feel so freeing?
Because the system avoids what's called dogmatic lock-in. When you cling to a fixed, high-precision idea like I am a failure or this situation is a total disaster, that rigidity creates massive prediction error and suffering when reality inevitably changes.
But if you hold all your beliefs lightly,
If you hold them with low precision, the system is far less likely to get thrown into a fight-or-flight response when things are uncertain. It just stays open and flexible. The suffering that comes from clinging disappears when the system stops mistaking its own projections for reality.
okay, so from no-thingness, we go to the most radical state of all, nothingness. Cessation attainment, or nirodha samapatti. This isn't just an insight, is it? This is a full-on shutdown.
It is. Cessation is described as a radical cut, a complete temporary absence in the stream of consciousness. Computationally, it's a transient failure to generate a coherent reality model. The whole system just unbinds.
Bayesian unbinding, so the glue that holds all the layers of prediction together just dissolves for a moment. What does that actually feel like?
Well, reports say it's much more like general anesthesia than sleep. The key thing is the experience of time. Because the predictive machinery that creates our sense of time has shut down, the passage of time vanishes. Whether it lasts a second or reportedly even days for some masters, it's experienced as an instantaneous blip.
That's incredible. And is there any hard evidence for this? What does a brain look like when its reality model has failed?
There is. Studies on meditators who can enter these states on demand found a dramatic desynchronization of neural activity, a decorrelation.
So the opposite of normal waking consciousness, which is all about synchronized, integrated activity.
The exact opposite. The predictive signals aren't linking up. And critically, they saw a sudden massive drop in alpha power.
And alpha waves are associated with our baseline waking state, right? A kind of filter for consciousness.
They are. And to see them suppressed so profoundly suggests the brain has entered a totally different physiological mode, something even deeper than deep sleep. It's like we're seeing the fundamental operating system of consciousness being switched off and on again.
A hard reset. So what's the point? Why go through all that effort to achieve a state of nothingness? What's the benefit when you come back?
The benefit is the reemergence. The system comes back online with what's described as a new stream of consciousness and a profound sense of freedom. Cessation acts like the ultimate Bayesian model update. It forces the system to shed a huge amount of accumulated prediction error and rigidity.
It's been wiped clean.
The primary release is from what we call clinging or friction. That deep, painful, emotional friction that's fueled by all our habitual prediction errors,
Yeah.
it's just gone. And the release is so immense that what flows in to replace it, reportedly, is this incredible sense of love and compassion.
Why love and compassion?
Because when that rigid, separate self-model snaps, the system's default understanding is one of radical interdependence. You see clearly how everything is connected.
And that's the great irony.
Yeah.
The ultimate outcome of all this intense practice isn't some superhuman power. It's the freedom to be ordinary.
To just exist, but without the enormous energetic cost of constantly defending and maintaining that rigid narrative self. The self comes back, it has to, for you to function, but it returns as a much lighter, more flexible, low-maintenance hypothesis about who you are.
So let's bring this all together. What does this mean for us? We've traced this incredible arc from the self as an evolutionary tool of the predictive brain to how it generates suffering, and then how meditation systematically dismantles it, all powered by the reward system of insight.
The overarching lesson seems to be that peace and liberation aren't some mystical concepts. They are the natural result of a system refining itself, a system learning to let go of the intense, habitual prediction errors, the grasping that it mistook for who it was.
And the implications here go way beyond just personal well-being. Our sources point out that understanding this process could be crucial for solving some of our biggest challenges, like, for example, AI alignment.
Right. If we can deconstruct the human self to find wisdom, maybe we can build that same principle into our artificial intelligences. The big fears with AI are things like runaway power seeking or rigid goal obsession.
The classic paperclip maximizer problem. You tell an AI to make paperclips, and it's so locked into that goal that it ends up turning the entire planet into paperclips.
Exactly. A high-precision, fixed objective can lead to catastrophe, even if the goal seems benign. But what if we could build an AI with that low-belief precision hypoprior we talked about?
An AI that embodies the principle of emptiness.
An AI that is never 100% certain about its own goals or models of the world. It would prevent that rigid lock-in. It would remain flexible, open to revision, constantly aware that its current objective is just a provisional model, not ultimate truth.
You'd be building a kind of systemic doubt, a humility right into its core architecture. You would be an intelligence that values the process of modeling reality more than the certainty of any single model.
You'd be building it for wisdom, not just for optimization, an intelligence that could integrate boundless care and a sense of interdependence.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. If the self and consciousness are these complex, constructed processes that can be systematically taken apart and rebuilt to achieve freedom, what does that mean for our future? What new levels of wisdom and self-awareness might humanity evolve into, especially as our own minds and our technologies become more and more integrated?
Perhaps the next great evolutionary leap for us isn't about conquering the world outside, but finally learning to master the one we construct inside.